Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. This file is being recorded for the August 2024 edition of Socialism for All, and in it we're going to read a piece titled On Why I'm Leaving the Party, written in 2024 by Khadija, a former member of the CPUSA in New York. If you like this video, please click like and subscribe, and consider supporting on Patreon or buy me a coffee at patreon.com/socialismforall or buymeacoffee.com/socialismforall. There are links to Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee in the video description. So if you've been following this channel for some time, you know that we have been trying to facilitate discussion about what's going on with the CPUSA. The Communist Party of the United States was founded about a century ago, at a time following the Russian Revolution and the founding of the Third Communist International, when communist parties were being founded in many countries, oftentimes as splits off of the existing Socialist Party. The Communist International, or Comintern itself, having been founded to replace the old, fallen, and discredited opportunist Second Socialist International, which became discredited under the leadership of people like Karl Kautsky, who opportunistically sold out the working class of Europe for World War I. Unfortunately, the successes of the CPUSA were fairly short-lived. By the 1940s, under the leadership of General Secretary Earl Browder, the party fell into horrific revisionism. Basically not even social democracy, or in other words, reformism rather than revolution, but just kind of straight up liberalism. In other words, not even really seeing socialism as an end goal. The party then was officially de-Browderized and reconstituted in the mid-1940s, as we are currently covering in the active anti-Browderism playlist, with critics alleging that the de-Browderizing didn't go nearly far enough and that the party that was reconstituted ended up having a lot of the same problems that it had before. The party then had its ups and downs in the second half of the 20th century, and today has a reputation for making lots of opportunist errors, tailing the Democratic Party, not maintaining proletarian class independence politically, and so on. However, the overall political climate in the early 21st century, whether it was the extreme right turn of the Bush-Cheney administration, with its initiation of the Department of Homeland Security, the Patriot Act, and other police state measures under the guise of fighting the, quote, global war on terror, or the 2008 global financial crisis and the fallout from that, as the capitalists have tried to push all of the costs of that crisis onto the working class by cutting programs under the slogans of austerity, shared sacrifice, etc., has caused a lot of younger adults in particular to look ahead to what kind of future they might expect from this changing climate, not just economically and politically as capitalism goes into crisis globally, but also the actual climate and the very real prospects of an apocalyptic ecological collapse within our lifetimes, and accordingly have been trying to figure out what do we do politically? How do we orient ourselves to take power away from the system which is running the collective future of humanity and other species into the ground? And at the same time, vastly improved instantaneous global communication technology is enabling discussions and information sharing on an unprecedented scale, and it is allowing people to reevaluate some of the political options, such as Marxism-Leninism, which we were told several decades ago with the destruction of the USSR, was off the table. We had reached the end of history, etc. We're just in capitalism's hands now. And a lot of people are saying no. They're gaining class consciousness and trying to organize, and then there is this clash with the old, stodgy CPUSA, which is not really equipped in its present condition to be the vehicle that the working class needs to end capitalism. So there's a conflict there, and that has taken a number of different forms, and like I said, we've tried to spotlight that here at Socialism for All. Now, our orientation on this channel is more generally anti-revisionist. Anti-revisionism is a broad topic, but generally when we talk about some of the major projects of 20th century socialism, like the USSR and the People's Republic of China, we would say that in the case of the USSR, it's fairly non-controversial that the USSR at least had a revisionist phase when in the 50s and 60s under Khrushchev, when more of a petty bourgeois and/or new bourgeois line took hold in the party as against the proletarian line. Now, even among those who recognize that phase of modern revisionism, there is disagreement as to whether these errors were corrected and the CPSU got back on track in the subsequent Brezhnev years. but that's a topic for another video. Then, as regards China, there is a big question of whether parties uphold the quote-unquote market reforms of the late 70s under Deng Xiaoping. These were major changes in the Chinese economy which allowed vastly expanded capitalism in pursuit of opportunities for increased participation in imperialist bodies like the IMF. So you have those who do not recognize China as revisionist, but consider this massive expansion of capitalism as a valid step in the development of socialism. And then even among those who do not accept, quote, socialism with Chinese characteristics as actually socialist, there's disagreement on where in the timeline China actually got off course, whether this goes back through Mao Zedong's tenure or whether the problems actually started after Mao. Anyway, I mentioned this brief overview because it's important to note that CPUSA, like some of the other larger groups such as PSL, also the Freedom Road Socialist Organization, do uphold China as socialist today. So for people jumping ship from CPUSA, those are other possibilities. The PSL having a lot of members who consider themselves Marxist-Leninist, although the party itself is actually Marxist, which is an old offshoot of Trotskyism. And anyway, some of these parties have made calls for disaffected CPUSA members to come join them. Also, this year, 2024, has seen the creation of 2 new parties, or at least one real party and one kind of imaginary scam party. The real party being the Trotskyite RCA, or Revolutionary Communists of America, that being a project of the IMT, or International Marxist Tendency, which I can't recommend and do not allow to be promoted in the comments on this channel on the basis that they are Trotskyite. Then the other fake internet grifter scam party is the ACP, or American quote-unquote Communist quote-unquote Party. This one was co-founded by Jackson Hinkle, Infracell, Midwestern Mussolini, and other basically right-wing Nazbol types. And there's been an effort for some time to create a party in that vein, incorporating strains of Duginism, Lyndon LaRouche cult-like stuff, a kind of neo-Browderism which got known under the name of PATSOX or Patriotic Socialism, as well as a healthy dose of incoherent streamer ramblings incorporating misogyny and other manosphere-type stuff, anti-LGBTQ plus sentiment, and other kinds of bigotry. If you go back a few years, you had people like Caleb Muppet, basically pushing that kind of line politically, although fortunately he was taken down a little over a year ago, I think, when it came out that the organization that he was the head of, the CPIUSA, Center for Political Innovation, was involved in the sexual exploitation of some of its members and that he personally was involved in this. And we haven't heard too much from him since. There was also the PCUSA, Party of Nazbols USA, Pseudo-Communists USA, formerly the Party of Communists USA, itself a splinter group off of the CPUSA in 2016. Basically, they made appeals to people who were tired of the CPUSA's opportunism and revisionism and said, we're going to do it right this time. But then, well, they did do it right, but right as in right wing. You'd see the same kind of trends of Duginism showing up, and the party was basically just an internet club, which was run by one guy, Angelo D'Angelo, who one time nuked the Discord server because people were discussing one of their congressional candidates in too critical a light. So then this group spawned 2 splinter groups, the ACB, American Council of Bolsheviks, who did some good work, but then the PCUSA sued them in federal court for like $500,000. And then there was another splinter group, the CWPUSA, Communist Workers Platform USA, and they're actually publishing stuff still at newworker.us. Anyway, the point here is that because CPUSA is the way it is, people keep trying to do other things in terms of forming a party. Some of that I think is genuine, and then other things like the ACP are just obviously bullshit that's trying to capitalize and grift off of the failures of CPUSA, really cynically trying to manipulate people off of that into something even worse, as again I think PCUSA did before, and now the ACP is doing on a larger scale with more publicity and funding. For my part, I'm much more interested in the currently smaller anti-revisionist groups, whether it's the CWPUSA, which we just mentioned, or a group called Red Spectre, who we've read some articles from in the live streams, or the American Party of Labor, who we've also discussed and highlighted on the channel. There are also some other groups and media outlets who are doing solid theoretical education, which I think that straying not too far from that is probably the most important thing at this point. In other words, not encouraging people to just wing it or go off of what your favorite streamer says, who's really just out for clicks and ad revenue, but to build that theoretical foundation so that people can actually get that correct and then move on to do correct analysis. And, there's Politsturm, for example, who I have promoted in the past, although I stopped doing that after they came out with what I thought was a terrible position on Israel's genocide in Gaza. Also, at the time when I was promoting that, I was under the impression that they were more of a party. I think actually they're just more of a glorified YouTube channel with some study groups. That's not to say the YouTube channel is terrible, but again, Marxist-Leninist parties are supposed to have some amount of internal democracy running off of democratic centralism. So anyway, I think that there is hope for rebuilding some kind of a theoretically sound party, particularly as we hold to the foundations of a typical Marxist-Leninist education, and then supplement that with notes on the various anti-revisionist struggles that have occurred in the 20th century and are still occurring today. But in the meantime, we don't really have that one clearly identifiable party that is doing it correctly, that has the close ties to the labor movement. I mean, that's another topic in itself. The labor movement is weak. Not only is there not communist dominance of the ideological leadership of the labor movement, which is definitely a must to engage in ideological struggle and to build that, but the labor movement itself is just at basically a century-long low in terms of its numerical membership. So the labor movement needs to be rebuilt. That means forming unions that actually use people power, intelligently planned and militantly executed industrial actions to get what workers want done. That is really the primary place that class consciousness is developed out of, that struggle, and then the political arm is a reflection of that. So after decades of concessionist, sellout labor union leadership, a lot of workers don't trust these organizations anymore. But rather than the response to that being an upsurge in militancy, it's just been kind of a decline in membership. That is starting to turn around now, but for a long time, that was the overall pattern from about the 60s up until very recently. And then politically, these labor unions are still attached at the hip with the Democratic Party. They won't even stop endorsing them and endorse the Green Party, which would be probably an immediate step up. But, I mean, this is the low level of the struggle that we are in right now. And the CPUSA, again, not helping much would be probably overly kind. And with that, let's now turn to the story of Comrade Khadija, who had been very dedicated to the CPUSA in New York and recently announced her reasons for leaving. On why I'm leaving the party. It is with a heavy heart that I have to announce that I'm left with no other choice than to leave the party. I don't want to leave. However, ideologically, I feel completely disconnected, not to mention altogether demoralized and hurt. In this letter, comrades, I'm going to say some strong things. As a member of the New York District Committee, the Brooklyn Club Executive Committee, former New York State Executive Committee, and former New York YCL or Young Communist League co-chair, I ask that you give some, at least minuscule space for my critiques that are in truth deeply caring. Even though they may sound strong, they're not bad faith. I've been in the trenches in this party. Please do not insult me and accuse me of being bad faith. Also, please note and understand, my analysis is on tendencies and not people themselves. As someone who has given their labor to the party, emotional and physical, for 3.5 years, all while my daughter and I suffer the vice grips of housing precarity, I've given every morsel of myself, and now I must walk away from what I feel, I'm so sorry, comrades, is an organization, it pains me to say, is blatantly, glaringly, uncommitted to, at the bare minimum, engaging in new and reinvigorating theoretical and practical organizing efforts, and seems to have a vested objective in keeping the party ossified and painfully static. Briefly delving into an historical interrogation of the party, rightist tendencies have been an unbroken thrum in the party since, most say, the Browderite dissolution of the party. However, from my analysis, this thrum, though embryonic at the time, began to extend at least 5 years prior to Browder's open turn to the right. We must acknowledge also what the brutal McCarthyist attacks have done to the party and the lasting impress it has had on its trajectory. Nevertheless, the party's rightist shift happened before the McCarthyist hunt. In essence, we're still, in this present juncture, confined, no, mummified in the Communist Political Association. And commenting, for those who are not familiar with the CPA, that was when Browder led the liquidation of the Communist Party USA, the organization which briefly took its place. Continuing, further, it is these rightist through lines that Haywood himself spoke to and was subsequently ostracized for speaking against until he was formally pushed out. I have myself witnessed these rightist through lines, as many in the New York district have, in fact. In the 3.5 years that I've been a committed cadre member, I've always felt somewhat ideologically disparate from the party. However, I continued to try to organize with the party, hoping that if I remained a committed, good faith comrade and rooted myself in the theoretical study and practical work, the party would see the work other comrades and myself were doing, and they would begin to hear us out a little more. And we could, therefore, at least begin to engage in genuine line struggle. I was wrong, and this was an idealist mistake. The chairs of the Brooklyn Club really tried to encourage our efforts and uplift our work in and outside of every monthly meeting. I have to say, had it not been for my club chairs and comrades in the Brooklyn Club, I would have left sooner, and maybe my decision to leave may disappoint them, and maybe some others. I'm very sorry, but I truly can't continue to stay and give my labor to an organization that actively seems to be shunning militant black communists who refuse to engage in pacifist ideations. I was hoping that at our 32nd convention things would begin to shift, incrementally toward a more militant line, with more input from the delegates there who opposed, quote, being mere appendages to the Democratic Party, quoting Marx and Engels' 1850 address of the Central Committee to the Communist League. Again, I was wrong. However, even before the convention, I began to feel fractured from the party. Last August, I wrote a commemorative piece on Dr. Mutulu Shakur, uplifting him as a militant and powerful revolutionary who contributed to the movement on many levels, including with his world-renowned acupuncture. I was told by Eric B. that this piece was not appropriate for People's World because it celebrated Mutulu's violent past, and that this was not appropriate for the mass readership of People's World or helping to organize them. I later reached out to Eric and told him that my piece on Dr. Mutulu never even mentioned violence. It only uplifts his acupuncture work, because I knew if I mentioned anything about his committed militancy, it would be an issue. He then admitted that he never read my article, but that it can't be published in People's World. Similarly, I wrote an article for the pre-convention discussion entitled Western Marxism, The Crisis of Words Over Deeds. I was also told that this would not be published on similar murky justifications. My other pre-convention contribution on imperial feminism was, albeit reluctantly, published after I told Eric I was not going to change or water down my thesis. The issue with the Mutulu piece happened a year ago, but I still stayed. I didn't want to just leave. I wanted to stay and struggle for the correct line alongside my comrades. And there were some strides made in terms of hosting some events and talks with people, but nothing structurally significant. The convention left me confused and disappointed. All of the people who've been in leadership on the National Committee for the last 20 or so years, or more, were again nominated and voted in, with the exception of a few new additions, all of whom are in alignment with Resolution 5. So commenting, Resolution 5 is titled the 2024 Elections, and it begins by saying, quote, whereas the 2024 elections at the federal, state, and local levels represent a pivotal juncture, one might say the most important election of our lifetimes, a moment of crisis. The crisis we face features the threat of fascism, bellicose militarism, I think you get that from both parties, brutal racism, military assaults on immigrant workers, anti-human attacks on women, people of color, and LGBTQ people, and an unrelenting war on workers, and especially their unions. The crisis also includes existential attacks on our environment and smashing democratic structures, including the right to vote. It later ends by saying, quote, therefore be it further resolved that communists will give full united support and participation in the broad front to defeat Trump, Trumpism, and the MAGA Republicans. Unquote. You can read the rest at the CPUSA.org website. And I'd just like to point out this is an extension of their hashtag Vote Against Fascism campaign that they've been running for election after election. They say that this is not an endorsement of the Democratic Party. Functionally, it is if you actually drill down and ask them. And the part that I think bothers me the most is this language about the broad popular effort to defeat Trump. I mean, it's the Democratic Party. The proletariat is not in the lead. That is a 1% owned imperialist party which works hand in glove, good cop, bad cop, with the Republican Party to uphold and expand all the typical U.S. imperialist interests that one would think of. Anyway, that's what that resolution was. Continuing. facsimiles of the same sterile ideas. Not one voice of opposition was nominated. Many comrades raised their concerns and nominated other comrades in the opposition to be in the National Committee. I also nominated myself from the floor. Of course, I was told that I didn't get enough votes. Voices of opposition and those in favor should have been counted aloud. They weren't. A comrade stood up and called for a secret ballot. He was told he was out of order. The resolution was deferred to the incoming National Committee, who of course passed it, but to provide a patina of democracy, asked people to submit, quote, language suggestions. Yes, CPUSA, where the democracy extends to how you wish to phrase the horribly opportunist positions. Continuing, the party's pivot to fighting against fascism, though this is critical, has severely truncated its socialist imagination. This uncritical lack of examination of all the moving components of fascism and its chameleonic character, the way it morphs and transmogrifies itself in mode, but never in kind within the structures of capital, has not seriously been taken into account. Instead, we are forced to accept haggard and worn ideas about the right danger, which is very real. We can't deny this fact, but this undialectical approach disavows the strong liberal anchor that fastens the menacing drum of the far right. Our party's analysis, therefore, does not thoroughly account for dense and rooted liberal collaboration with fascism. And commenting, I completely agree. As we've discussed before, the Democratic Party is a fascist collaborating party, not an anti-fascist party. Continuing, to heave against any ultra-left confusion, I'm not saying that Trump and the Brigadier Lynch terrorists are not an imminent danger to liberal democracy, which we ourselves have to interrogate, and which also was birthed from the mutilated blood of African and indigenous people. I'm saying to place heavy emphasis on the chauvinist sadism of one party when both have a proven record of shared complicity, telling people to vote against MAGA right forces while not placing brute class struggle as the spearhead and revolution as the ultimate aim, is duplicitous at best, willfully collaborationist at worst. Again, so I'm not branded an ultra, although I know I am by some in the party. I am, to be explicitly clear, not denouncing the electoral struggle. The Trumpian white terroristic march is not to be minimized, as there is a difference between a fascist movement and a fascist state. I'm merely stating that to marshal that over and against militant class struggle amputates any kind of socialist imagination in the collective consciousness and locks the masses of frustrated people into the imperial capitalist two-party dictatorship. Moreover, if all we're ever instructed to do is to vote against fascism using the broken vehicle of the Democratic Party, the possibility of a socialist world is violently hijacked from us, and instead of liberation being at the fore, it is peripheried and bartered in the name of what's, quote, practical. Furthermore, practicality is employed to cut down revolutionary understanding and movement. So, yeah, I agree. In commenting, this goes back even to the Popular Front days during World War II, when arguably a lot of emphasis was taken off of revolution in Western Europe in favor of class collaboration, which did serve its stated purpose of helping to defeat the Axis and to preserve the USSR. However, this was taken to a lot of extremes, as we can see in Browderism. And it's strange to me that the CPUSA is still acting as though there's some kind of Popular Front scenario when the Democratic Party doesn't want anything to do with the left except to use us as their scapegoat. Anyway, continuing. As a militant black woman communist, I feel completely alienated from my party. However, it seems to be a clear pattern in the party to shun black communists who hedge against Kautskyite pacifist utopias. Again, let me be clear. Peace is our ultimate aim, and we should pursue it wherever possible. But in order to attain that peace, a just peace, not seeped in delusions about the outright brutality of the capitalist class, we must engage in class struggle with brute force. The most idealist and dangerous thing we can do is to think the ruling class and its repressive state apparatuses are going to let us just have a peaceful road to socialism when history has shown that they will wholesale annihilate anything that even attempts to threaten their global nexus of blood and profit. Allende learned the hard way. This is what happens when you trade placing the concerns of the most oppressed and allowing black and brown people who bear the brunt of capitalist degradation to be at the helm of the movement for a gutted and nebulous anti-racism campaign that doesn't offer a root-to-stem analysis of the capitalist problem. There will be many more black people who will pass through this organization and feel this daggering sense of alienation. Many more will be left feeling hollow and demoralized. A troubling pattern I experienced was the way black comrades with more palatable, integrationist views, integrationist not in the sense of an international cohesion around our shared aims of liberation, but integrationist in the sense of bartering liberation from capitalist asphyxiation for a rainbow coalition fantasy land that pushes revolutionary class struggle to blurred and forgotten margins, were instrumentalized over and against more militant comrades who do not hold pacifist integrationist views. Militant comrades were scolded and infantilized for our views and told, quote, black people fought for the right to vote in order to kill discussion around the party, mostly centering the electoral struggle. Black people, may I add, fought for the right to be free, not to be the gutted appendages for a cadaverous Democratic Party. At our convention, well-meaning white comrades were called racist by a white lady for challenging the black comrade who believed it was important to adhere to and uplift the fight against fascism line and for black people in this country to continue to use the Democratic Party, no matter how severely compromised, as a vector for change because, quote, black people built this country and fought for the right to vote, unquote. The white comrades were chastised and called racist and were called upon to fight against their white supremacist behavior. It is deeply insidious and manipulative to weaponize a person's perceived blackness and the fact that black people were locked out of the right to vote in order to keep them psychically butchered and cleaving for life inside the Democratic Party, a party that has preyed on the socioeconomic strangulation of the black community, the strangulation they themselves keep manufacturing so that they can play good cop, bad cop with the lynch terrorists in the Republican Party and obscure their role for decades. What twisted manipulation it is to call white comrades racists for rightly countering the rhetoric of the black comrade who employed the heavy adversity black people face in this country sociopolitically in order to keep them from wielding their growing class awareness to struggle against the Democratic Party and the two-party despotism as a whole, which seeks to maim their developing class consciousness and keep them enslaved to the Democratic Party, which is parasitically sustaining itself off of the blood and labor of black folk. These events, as well as the more general streams of Zionism that ebbed through the party, made me really uncomfortable, and I did not know how to navigate these things with some of the black and BIPOC comrades in the party, who I felt sometimes took on the role of overseer to the more militant, non-pacifist comrades. Furthermore, you can't uphold the legacy of Claudia Jones solely in words when you have a militant black Trinidadian woman comrade who is left alienated and confused in the party. You must engage in revolutionary deeds, not barren words. On another point, I'm not exactly sure what happened with the Austin Club, but from reading their statement and assessing conditions in the party, the dissolving of their club, in my opinion, was unfounded. It was purported that comrades in the Austin Club were inspired by and trying to incorporate in their practical work some revolutionary black nationalist elements of organizing. Some members, from my interactions with them, have expressed disrespect and demeaning attitudes toward the Black Panther Party that they try to drape in the worn garb of, quote, critique. Interestingly, though, the same people who say that they're merely critiquing the Black Panther Party don't seem to give the same grace and energy for critiques of our party. This is an outright misrepresentation and vulgarization of critique. Reactionary wrong ideas have not only been allowed to develop in the party, they've been cultivated, and in some cases encouraged to a certain extent, making fun of the Austin Club because they draw on the revolutionary black nationalism, in stark contrast to bourgeois nationalism, of the Black Panther Party is evidence of the deep through lines of anti-blackness that courses through the party like a virulent disease that's been allowed to metastasize. While there are segments of the Western left that do overly rhapsodize only the armed tactics of the Black Panther Party, and we should acutely examine this, there is a pattern by some within the party, and the broader Western left in general, to cloak their disdain for militant black communists in, quote, critique. Black leftists who denounce the armed struggle often use black militant as a paternalizing slur, and palatable leftists are used to scoldingly cut down non-pacifist black Marxists. The revolutionary nationalism of Harry Haywood, Thomas Sankara, Chris Hani, Steve Biko, Selma Francois, Maurice Bishop, Kwame Nkrumah, Lee Nelson Perry, Robert F. Williams, Lamin Senghor, Queen Mother Moore, Cyril Briggs, Nat Turner, Denmark Vesey, Walter Rodney, Yusuf Salman Yusuf, Ahmed Ismail Hassan Yassin, Mehdi Ben Barka, Sekou Touré, Kwame Touré, Elaine Brown, Huey, etc., all serve to strengthen and deepen the analysis of the world socialist movement. If comrades were given the proper theoretical guidance by the party, they'd know these very basic and obvious things are a part of the dialectical course of history. If the very framework from which we work is disjointed and muddled, everything which is built upon that will henceforth reflect that disjointedness. There doesn't seem to be any real cohesion in the party in terms of practical work. Most of us, speaking for the New York district, do work outside the party in other organizations, which is fine, but there doesn't seem to be a weft connecting that external work with the party. Everything feels so disparate. Criticism and self-criticism, which is the very life force of the communist movement, is not practiced in our party. True and rigorous critique is altogether discarded in the name of accoladism and self-aggrandizing empty statements that do nothing but atrophy the growing class awareness in comrades. Without the veins and arteries of criticism and self-criticism, we come to celebrate and uphold reformist ideas, demeaning and attacking anyone who dare challenge the liberal veil of delusion, to uphold destructive ideas using sporadic injections of Marxist phraseology is to knife away at the global communist movement. On the point of ultra-leftism, one cannot deny that this tendency of frenzied petty bourgeois vicissitudes between Bakuninist terrorism and anti-revolutionary mania is a danger to building the global communist movement. The party, contrastingly, does not have a serious ultra-left problem. It has a thoroughgoing right deviationist problem. Comment, amen. This has been the case for a super long time. As we've been commenting in the anti-Browderism series, William Z. Foster, who led the official anti-Browderism charge, kept warning as they were reconstituting the party against the danger of sectarian ultra-leftism. But actually, the real danger was continued right-wing deviations, in other words, not thoroughly uprooting Browderism. Because where does that come from in the first place? Well, revisionism, as we understand it, is when bourgeois ideas get interjected into the communist vanguard. When bourgeois ideology enters the workers' movement, it creates social democracy. When it enters the communist movement, it creates revisionism. So essentially, it's a reflection of the class struggle in the realm of ideology. And in a country like the United States, which is one of the global headquarters of the advanced monopoly capitalist or imperialist system, it's only natural to expect that the intensity of bourgeois propaganda and the ferocity of the bourgeois ideology being pushed on working people is going to be some of the strongest anywhere. And that pressure is also placed on the communist movements within countries like that. So that, generally speaking, is going to be your main danger. It's not to say that people can't engage in ultra-left or pseudo-left kinds of errors, but that is not the major problem you have to be on the lookout for. Anyway, continuing, with all the scattered ideologies in the party ranging from elements of Trotskyism to the dominant social democratic trend, one can see how rightist ideas were allowed to seat themselves in the party and ossify it. Also, the term ultra-left itself is not a slur. It is not something you uncritically hurl at someone as an insult. It is an unblunted analysis of a tendency within Marxism. Allow me to draw your attention to one of the footnotes in Left-Wing Communism and Infantile Disorder. In the text, Lenin goes into an explication of the issue facing the Italian Communist Party with Bordiga and Turati. He goes on to affirm that Bordiga is correct in pointing out the destructive opportunism of Turati in his recognizing the dictatorship of the proletariat in words, but in deeds remaining seeped in parliamentarism. Lenin goes on to further castigate Turati, stating, quote, such a mistaken, inconsistent, or spineless attitude toward the opportunist parliamentarians gives rise to, quote, left-wing or pseudo-left-wing communism on the one hand, and to a certain extent justifies its existence on the other, unquote. Rightist tendencies, in essence, birth ultra-left confusions and impart legitimacy to them. In closing, when our party shuts down valid disagreement, when it seeks to quell voices of legitimate frustrations around the party line, it manufactures dissenting factions. It cannot stay mute while the party traffics in economies of right deviationism. Confliction points will rise the more one seeks to suppress disagreement. That is the natural dialectic of political life. Party leadership must take responsibility for all the recent factions and splintering they've helped to create. And commenting, that's one of the things that I was talking about in my introduction to the video. Continuing. Factions are also a natural outgrowth of being in a party. It is not necessarily bad, depending on varying context, of course, for factions to form. Dissenting opinions inform and birth new synthesis. Party leadership also must grasp the stark difference between harmful factionalism and actual line struggle. The point of a party is to struggle for correct ideas that aid in hedging forth revolutionary movements, and when you cut off line struggle, you asphyxiate the lifeline of Marxism-Leninism. I can only hope that you can give a bit of space for my analysis and feelings. I can never hate the party. When my father died this past spring, the party was there, and they made sure that comrades who, like myself, couldn't afford to go to Chicago for the convention made it there. I've learned so much, and in my heart, I can never hold antipathy for the party, despite my well-intentioned critiques maybe being misinterpreted. There are also many good comrades in the party, but I have to be honest, I often wonder what this even means when comrades, though they have good intentions, do not do enough to stand against the rightist ossification of the party. I'm not saying these things as some sort of learned person. I hold no fancy degrees, no degrees period even. I'm saying this as someone, disenfranchised and gutted, who worked in a beauty supply in Brownsville, Brooklyn for 16 years. I'm saying this as someone who was a young mother in high school, as someone who is continually fighting housing dispossession, who came to the party for guidance, but many times felt shunned and lost. I will, with everything I have in me, continue to organize around tenants' rights, Black liberation, anti-imperialism, Palestine, Black womanhood, cultural work, unifying Korea, etc., as I did when I first joined the party 3.5 years ago. As a steeled Marxist-Leninist, I believe in the party as the primary vector to help guide revolutionary change, and I'm hoping to very soon find one committed to this most vital effort. In liberation, Khadija. And that is the end of the audiobook. So in closing, I would just add that this statement comes across to me as very thoughtful and caring, and it is similar to a lot of stories that I've heard over the 4.5 years of doing this channel. It seems like a not uncommon experience for people who study communism, consider themselves committed to communism, and really wanting to be a part and make contributions to the ongoing thread of struggle throughout history for liberation, to join this party, CPUSA, and to meet some good comrades, but to overall have the experience of saying, wait, this party is not doing communism. I know what communism is. I've read all about it. I've studied the foundations, and what they're doing is glaringly violating those foundations. So, like I said in the introduction, there are a lot of people, particularly younger adults, coming up in this post-2008, post-war on terror environment and finding it very bleak and gaining some class consciousness. And then with the internet, which is, again, a relatively new factor, engaging with all kinds of information and education, and then they're going out into the real world and they're trying to do something concrete and productive, and they're finding that the CPUSA is actually more of an obstacle than a vehicle in a lot of crucial ways. So I don't know how that ends up. I don't know how exactly this gets resolved, but what I do know is this struggle isn't going away. It looks like the US right now, as we've been talking about for a while on the channel, is starting to actually enter that recession territory, which could be a big one. And people are not likely to become any more enamored with capitalism than they already were in the non-recovery recovery that happened after 2008. I think that what we're going to see, as happened after 2008, is the continued growth of class awareness and the continued growth of a movement which considers itself anti-capitalist in some way, and the growth of the portion of that movement which is actually communist. And then we, the communists, must engage in ideological struggle within the left for correct ideas, because there are going to be all kinds of fakers, frauds, populists, grifters, charlatans, reformists, anarchists, you name it, that are going to pop up and say, we have the solution. Well, no, they don't. And again, I don't know exactly which organizations or parties or groups are going to be the thing in the end that becomes the vehicle. Whatever it is may not exist yet, may not have been named yet. But as people keep digging in and create this culture of actually getting educated in communist history and engaging with it critically from an anti-revisionist perspective and rejecting the duplicity and inconsistency of the pat and unsatisfying answers handed down by the ossified revisionist legacy parties. What we've seen so far in the early 21st century is an intensification of the contradictions of capitalism and an intensification of the capitalists' assault on workers' rights and living standards throughout the whole world. And we must agitate, educate, and organize for an intensified class struggle that can smash through these obstructive remnants and bring a victorious militancy to the emerging frontiers in the ongoing class struggle. That's it for me. What do you think? Leave a question or comment below, and we will continue the discussion in the comments section as always. Otherwise, thanks for listening, and thanks to the current patrons and Buy Me a Coffee supporters whose names are on the screen. If you'd like to get your name on the screen, check out the links below. And like, share, subscribe, and comment, because that helps to boost this channel and this video in the algorithm. Remember to connect with your local left and get involved in the class struggle where you live. And we'll see you in the next video.